My friends, what is going on? Welcome to Diner Talks with James. How's everybody doing today? My friends, I hope you can hear me okay. If you can, smash that like button, smash that heart button, smash whatever button you got around yourself, just so I know that the audio is coming in, because I had to take down the whole setup because I just built myself a new desk. So if everything sounds good to you, please let me know. That would be awesome. And as always, let me know where you are calling in from, my friends. I always like seeing who's on and who's here and whatnot. Amazing. I see y'all smashing some of those like buttons. I really appreciate it. That helps. Thank you so much, my boy Scott, back in the building. Brooklyn, we back on the map. My guy, good to see you. Good to see you. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right, my friends, I'm super excited to get this going. It's right, Scott, a fancy new desk. We out here. Got one of them L desks. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you got to get yourself a fancy desk because you need to be the CEO of your life. That's it. You know, I'm just working on that as I'm working on my Antonio Nevesisms here. All right, my friends, let's get this party cooking. Welcome to Diner Talks with James. I'm James, my friends. So excited to have you out here for another episode of Diner Talks with James. This is super exciting. We got my boy Antonio Neves in the building, coming out and rocking with us. He is an incredible man, and I can't wait to tell you about him. But first, my friends, we got some standards here. We got some standards in the diner. We got to start off with tonight's top three. All right, let's go it going. How about let's get it going too? Now, here is a random fact about me that I don't know if I've shared yet on this, but I am a car nerd. I just really like cars. I've always liked cars. I've grown up liking cars. And so I still read like Motor Trend and some of those kind of things. And so a big moment happened in automobile history this week. That's pretty cool. But this car company named Tuatara, I'm not exactly sure, broke the production car speed record. This car went 317 miles an hour. There have only been 2 or 3 production cars to ever cross the 300 mile an hour barrier. This car did it at 317, beating the previous record by almost 11 miles an hour. Anyway, I'm nerding out over this, so I thought we'd talk about some dream cars of mine. So first off, dream car mine is the Pagani Huayra. Incredible individual. Pagani is an incredible man. I've gotten to go to the factory in Italy. It was awesome. This car is named after a famous Argentinian wind, and I think it's one of the most beautiful cars I've ever seen in my life. Next favorite car of all time would have to be, oh man, it's a tough call. I'm probably going to have to go with the Koenigsegg Regera. And just stick with me if you're not car people, but I'm just telling you, it's a beautiful car. This guy Christian von Koenigsegg, completely created a brand new type of clutch, a brand new kind of engine, because he said, what I want a car to do, there's no car that can do it right now, so I'm going to recreate the engine. I think that's badass. But my all-time favorite car, my friends, 1988 Lamborghini Countach Special Edition, bright red. There you go, my friends. Fun fact about me. And also my 3 top cars right now. Next, my boy Antonio. He did a little TV stint, right? Did some impressive journalism. He also did some hosting and whatnot. And he hosted some shows on one of my favorite channels ever, Nickelodeon. So the last two things are in honor of of Antonio's time in Nickelodeon. So first off, my top 3 favorite Nickelodeon cartoons of all time. Now, I'm curious, you probably have some favorite cartoons of all time as well. You can let me know what those are in the chat if you want. But for me, Nickelodeon top 3 cartoons. I'm also going to date myself right now, so I'm sorry if I insult any of my younger listeners. But first off, Rocko's Modern Life. It's great. Just a classic show. I feel like I love Doug, but Doug's not making my top 3. Doug, if I was doing top four, maybe Doug would get in there. Basically because of Patty Mayonnaise, just a good human being. But alas, we're out here, top three, Rocko's Modern Life. Next, Rugrats. Are you kidding me? Rugrats maybe single-handedly taught me about the Jewish faith, besides the fact that I grew up on Long Island around a lot of Jewish folks. I'm fortunate enough to have them teach me a lot about their faith. But the Rugrats were an incredible life lesson every time. I love it. Shout out to Tommy pickles. All right. And last but not least, this one's a little controversial. I don't know why it was on Nickelodeon. It probably shouldn't have been on Nickelodeon. But growing up, I was a giant Ren and Stimpy fan. Even had the Ren and Stimpy comics. I even had a hat that had Ren. I had another hat that had Mr. Horse on it. I think Ren and Stimpy is an incredibly hysterical and disgusting, amazing time. Next, last but not least, top three, Nickelodeon top game shows. Again, going to date myself. I can't wait to have Antonio laugh at me about some of these. First off, Double Dare. Do you ever watch that Family Double Dare? That was a classic, y'all. I wanted to be on that show so bad, but my dad didn't even like playing Monopoly, let alone Double Dare. So that didn't happen. Also, next, The Legends of the Hidden Temple. So classic. How badly did you want to be on that show? That show was amazing. I wanted to be on it. I knew all the puzzles before those damn kids, probably because by that point I was a few years older, but let's not ignore that. Next, last but not least, I'll tell you a quick story. Guts is the last one of the greatest childhood game shows of all time. I wanted to go to the top of the aggro crag. I once had a very embarrassing moment where after school I came home and I was watching Guts and I started crying. And my mom said, "What are you crying about?" And I said, "I want to go up the aggro crag." Oh, that's a humbling thing that I just admitted out loud. All right, enough of that, my friends. Coming out to the stage right now is my boy, Antonio Neves. Antonio Neves is one of the most impactful speakers I've ever had the opportunity to sit in the audience in. But beyond that, he and I have become great friends. He's a man whose wisdom I cherish. He asks some of the best questions that I know and that I've ever been asked before. So I'm excited to have him on the other side. Though knowing him, he'll throw some back at me, and that's fine with me as well. But Antonio, one of the greatest question askers I know. He's a very powerful coach. He doesn't coach everybody now, but I'm sure if you ask him real nicely, he'll let you in there. But he also is the author of a book that is coming out very soon. It's called Stop Living on Autopilot. It's got a preposterously long subtitle, so I'll have him tell you that. But it's called Stop Living on Autopilot. It's available for pre-order on Amazon right now. He also hosts an incredible podcast called The Best Thing. And he is an incredible man. I'm excited to bring you out. He's got a smile that'll charm you in seconds. The man, the myth, the daddy of two beautiful twins. That's how twins work. Antonio Neves.
Why you got me rolling over here already with your L desk over there? That's what I'm talking about. And I was really excited to hear your three favorite Nickelodeon shows, man. It just took me back to some memories I haven't thought about in quite some time.
Did you grow up watching Nickelodeon?
Oh, of course I grew up watching Nickelodeon. Though, funny enough, my favorite Nickelodeon shows come from the era when I was actually working for Nickelodeon. But like you, early on, man, I loved Double Dare. I was watching reruns, I guess, of a show called You Can't Do That on television.
Sure. Yeah, great show.
But I actually liked the live action shows that came on in the early 2000s when I was working for Nickelodeon, like a show called Taina, which was dope. There was a show called Ed's Declassified, which is really. Did I freeze or did you freeze?
I'm not sure. Someone will tell us in the chat soon enough.
Okay. Master P's son Romeo. I had a show on Nickelodeon called Romeo, which was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, creatively titled.
Hey, you got the Romeo show.
Master P is now apparently a proud Minneapolis resident. He just moved out here, so he's just up here making them say na.
There you go. The ice cream man.
The ice cream man. I can't wait to see one of those gold-plated tanks rolling down the street.
No limit, baby. No limit. Everybody's like, what? They're like, what are they talking about?
They don't need to know. Not every joke's for everybody out here, Antonio.
That's for sure.
My guy, I got a question. We're talking in the diner right now. Now, are you a late night eater? You know, I know you're a man who respects fitness. I also know that you're someone who does a little bit of mindfulness and whatnot. So sometimes that also doesn't equate to someone who eats French toast and eggs and bacon at 1 a.m. But do you enjoy yourself a late night meal?
There was a period in my life when I loved a late night meal. First and foremost, that late night meal typically was cereal, man. I don't know about you, but you can't go wrong with a late night bowl of cereal. If you get some Cinnamon Life cereal and you let it hang out in the milk for an extended period, it's amazing. But also, I lived in New York. Though I live in Los Angeles now, I lived in New York City for a long time, and most of our meals started late, not midnight late, but 9, 10 o'clock sometimes. So I got used to eating late. These days, man, I'm trying to get 12 hours between my meals at minimum. So if I finish a meal at 7 p.m., I'm trying not to eat again until 7 a.m. at the earliest. But I can appreciate a late night meal for sure.
That's it. That's it. I respect it, man. I respect it. So now, is that a fasting thing where you wait 12 hours? Like, so you wake up in the morning, you're eating at 7 a.m., then 7 p.m., and then 7 a.m. the next day?
It really depends. So, I mean, not to get all into health and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there is something called intermittent fasting. And some people, that can be 12 hours, that can be 14 hours. It can be even a longer period. Before you start doing that, do your research in advance. But long story short, our body, man, it's kind of like, it needs those 12 hours, like to be the kind of the garbage disposal system, those 12 hours. So between the last meal and the first meal, a lot of functional medicine doctors I know, they all say, hey, have at least 12 hours so it can do its work. I think we got a lot of bad information a long time ago about having a lot of mini meals throughout the day. But we can't forget, man, we come from hunters and gatherers. Those cats ate when they got food. Like they weren't having like 6 meals a day. Like, yo, we just cubbed a baby bear, which I probably shouldn't say that right now, but they're gonna eat it right then and there. They're not like just chilling and letting it hang out. So our body isn't designed to eat all the damn time like we do. So anyhow, not to bore you with the Details in clubbing baby bears, which I don't advocate, just for the record.
Yeah. Here at Diner Talks with James, we do not advocate the clubbing of any animals. All right, please continue. Sorry, I had to put that in there.
I try to get a minimum of 12 hours between my last meal of the day and my first meal of the next day.
Okay. I did not know that about you. I knew you were someone that cared about mind, body, and spirit. But we never gotten into the weeds about it. So I appreciate you telling me about that, dude.
Yeah, man. I've been on a bit of I hate to call it a health kick. So I think sometimes when people get on health because they call it a health kick, but I really look at it as a life kick, man. We may get into it a little bit later on, but there were some times over the course of the past few years, frankly, I just didn't find myself feeling good. And the main culprit, when I really paid attention, was my diet and my fitness and what I was doing. And I realized there were some key things that I could do to right that. I've tested different things here and there. I'm not always perfect with this stuff. I love my Traeger grill is right. I'm looking at it right now over here. I love to grill. I love to eat a whole bunch of different foods and all that. But I'm just a little bit more conscious about what I'm putting in my body.
Yeah, for sure. Now, is that something that was spurred by anything? Like, I mean, you mentioned that you were kind of going through a little bit of a time. Like, how did you know that it was like, hey, this is probably food related, not necessarily like mental health? Like, I mean, how did you were like, this is maybe this is it? How did you center in on, potentially this is a dietary shift I need to make?
Yeah, first and foremost, I was feeling like a lot of people do, and that's like feeling like crap. I found myself with low energy, like just not having the energy that I used to have, and I blamed it on maybe getting older and those types of things. I'm a guy that in college was a collegiate athlete, and I love to work out, but I just wasn't feeling great. And a quick story, and I actually talk about this a little bit in my book. And James, you know a little bit about this. Back in 2016, man, I found myself at a moment I was playing with my kids a year after they were born, and I was on the floor just hanging out with them. And something just didn't feel right, man. I thought I was about to have a heart attack or pass out. Ended up going to the emergency room, and they did every test you could think on you, boy. I wore a heart monitor for a variety of weeks, went through MRIs, CAT scans, and all those things, and had thousands of dollars of medical bills. And the diagnosis was, we think you're stressed. And I was like, thanks, man. I spent all that money, but a culprit of that, a lot of it was different things that were going on in my life that I needed to address that I was conveniently ignoring, which we have human beings can do for a long time. Until I like to think about life. Sometimes we have different challenges going on, and it's like shaking up a Coke bottle, and at some point it's going to explode. And typically it explodes when you least want it to explode. And that was going on in my life. But then one of the things I started doing after that was to look and check on my diet. And I started working with some different functional medicine doctors and started getting different labs and tests that I otherwise wouldn't get. And I found there's some things that just weren't great for my body. I found out that I was eating a lot of crap that I thought was healthy. I was a big processed food kind of guy. Like most of my food came out of boxes at the time. And so now I'm really all about, as much as possible, trying to just eat real food. And when I say real food, something that doesn't come out of a box. It's as simple as that. And so, yeah, there was a genesis of I need to pay attention because something's not registering correctly in this body of mine.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hope you still every once in a while grab a bowl of cereal, brother. I mean,
oh, come on, man! Like, yeah, I got to make sure I don't feel guilty about it. I mean, I just made the most delicious bread pudding the other day, so I go for it. Don't get me wrong. We have fun in our household. I love to cook. I love to eat. I just have to make sure I got to look at my portion control.
Yeah. What'd you put in your bread pudding, man? You put raisins in your bread pudding? What we doing? We got a little vanilla ice cream? What we doing over here?
Listen,
little white chocolate? What's happening?
We can't talk about no raisins. People always want to put raisins and stuff and mess it up. I can't put raisins in my bread pudding. I can't put raisins.
White people want to talk about putting raisins and stuff like chicken salad,
potato salad, and all that. Listen, folks. My household, raisins were not allowed in any warm meal. To be clear, it was a pretty straightforward bread pudding. I got out of Magnolia Cookbook. You know, our good friends down there in Waco, Texas. Yeah. The Gaines that we know very well.
Sponsored by Magnolia. Yeah,
exactly. It was basic, man. Basic, heavy cream. Some nice 60% cacao chocolate. The recipe actually asked for some zest of orange, and I was like, "Zest? No, it's not happening." So I decided, but it was delicious. The family loved it, and I freezed a whole bunch for later.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree. But listen, raisins do mess things up. So anyone who's considering putting raisins in anything, if it's not Raisin Bran, leave it out.
I once was in Reno, Nevada, had the best bread pudding of my life. Can't forget when you have your best bread pudding. And they smothered it in white chocolate, and it was outrageous. It was a strong product.
That sounds like a good combo. I mean, I love desserts. Like I love chocolate brownies, and I love bread pudding, all those delicious things. Yeah. So we're friends there.
Listen, here's a place where we're not friends though. My dad is upset. Bread pudding without raisins.
I'm Mr. Robalata. I apologize. I'm not sure if Long Island got the memo or not. But yeah, we can't put the raisins in there.
I go both ways. I'm not gonna lie. So yeah, but I love that, man. I love that. Antonio, here's a cool thing. You mentioned that you spent some time in New York, and now when you showed up to New York. You weren't like, oh man, good thing I got this trust fund real quick, right? Like you weren't out here rolling in the dough. You weren't like limo service, everything like that. You showed up to New York with a dime and a nickel, and trying to make $1 out of 15 cents, as they say. But tell us a little bit about what drove you to New York. Right, you were coming from Michigan, correct?
It's an interesting
tell the story, man.
It's an interesting backstory because I come from a small town in Michigan. Frankly, man, it's one of those towns where people don't leave. Growing up where I was raised, you could always get a good job. You could get in the union. You could get a factory job. That's what I figured I would do. As my father's was a factory union worker his whole life, I figured that'd be my life as well. Yeah. But early on, I realized there was another path, thank goodness, and I was able to go to college, and I was a first generation college student. And then, James, I did what they told me to do in college. I got that good job everybody talks about. Yep. I was a sales representative for a major food company, had a company car, had a 401k plan, had benefits, and boy, was I miserable. Boy, was I miserable. I got that good job everybody talks about, and I was like, what's good about this? Because the truth is, growing up, man, I always loved stories. I love being a storyteller. I love watching stories on television. But where I came from, there was no one out in my world that I saw ever doing that. I didn't know you could move to Chicago. I didn't know you could move to New York. I didn't know you could move to LA. Yeah. But after a year of that good job, and for that whole year of working that good job, I felt this tap on my shoulder saying, this is a good job, but it's not your job. And I learned one of those lessons, man, that is so hard for people to learn. And so I'm going to hit somebody in the face with this right now. And that is, just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're supposed to be doing it. I was good at that good job selling cheese. Frankly, I worked for Kraft Foods. But after nearly a year in that job, I decided to do the scariest thing I ever did in my life, man. And to your point, I moved to New York City, arrived in the worst airport in America, LaGuardia.
Shout out to LaGuardia. LaGuardia's changed, man. It's beautiful now.
Like, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. You know, it's like, oh, you haven't talked to Jim in a long time? He's changed. No, Jim is still drinking. You just don't know. Arrived at LaGuardia with about $800 in my bank account. Didn't know anyone. This is before LinkedIn, before Facebook, before Twitter, all those social media stuff. I knew one person that I met when I studied abroad in Spain. That person was kind enough to let me sleep on their floor at their apartment in Astoria, Queens for a variety of months when I just worked jobs. And my goal was to break in the television industry. And I worked temp jobs in different office buildings in Manhattan. I worked at H&M selling clothes in the evenings, did catering jobs, serving food to people on the weekends. One time I served Lawrence Fishburne some risotto. Pretty sure it did not have raisins in it because raisins and risotto do not go together. And I pursued the television thing, and it took a good I think I arrived in New York basically January, and it was about 2.5 years later that I found my first quote unquote break on television.
Yeah. So you moved out. So at some point in time you said, you know what, I have this dream. And I want to, like, what was the original dream? Was the dream television? Was the dream a specific thing on television? Was it like, were you pointing the ship at something specific, or was the dream fame? Like, what was it for you?
You want to get heavy?
Always. I'm gonna stay heavy, bro.
On the surface, the dream was working in television. I got a taste of what it was like to be on a stage when I had an internship at Walt Disney World doing their college program, where I was a host at one of their attractions, Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, which no longer exists. Shout out Rick Moranis. Hope he's doing
great,
okay.
Though. It was a great product.
Oh, it was a great product. And I got a taste of that, and I I love being in front of audiences, and I love telling stories, etc. And so I went to New York City with the hopes of breaking in the television industry. The truth is, James, the television industry, and it took me 10 years of having success in that industry in a variety of capacities. What I really was seeking was validation. I was seeking acceptance. It took me many years to get it, but there was something really unique about going to auditions and going to these meetings and getting rejected. It was as if I loved, you're good, but you're not for us. It was as if I liked that rejection. And then finally, every now and then, if you're a good commercial actor, you're going to book maybe 1 out of 50 auditions if you're good, probably. And I've done commercials and all that. But when that one person says, we pick you, man, I've never done a crack, but I bet it's like doing that. It's like that hit of doing crack or something like that, because you're like, what? You want me? And all of a sudden, you're of value. But I've been of value all along, but it took that external validation from this party or that party or those round of applause for me to feel comfortable in myself. And the reason why I crave that validation, frankly, is because I had an upbringing where I didn't get as much of that as I really, really craved. And so I sought it out in an industry that a lot of people, and you know performers, James, so I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, these men and women that are pursuing sometimes this field of work for many of the wrong reasons. Maybe wrong reasons is the wrong way to put it, because I actually do love that work. I love being a storyteller. I love connecting. But I was seeking validation.
That's powerful, man. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that validation is a wonderful drug, right? I recommend it to most people. It's 10 out of 10 would recommend validation to anybody. And I am also someone who very frequently does not allow myself to internally validate myself. And that's something that I really struggle with. So while you were pursuing this dream, right, and you were starting to book a couple things here and there, and you're right, it's like 1 of every 50 commercials, even less for other types of gigs and whatnot, especially without management representation. And so while you were chasing it, at what point did you realize, oh, this ain't it? Right? Or did you realize validation is it, and I can get it somewhere else that is way safer for my self-esteem and maybe my bank account? Like what was that switch for you?
It took a very long time for me to get it. So again, that first gig was dating myself. Now, my first break with Nickelodeon was 2002. And it probably took, James, until 2009, 2010 when I realized what was going on. And I was so fortunate because by that time I had transitioned from working in the entertainment industry to doing more journalism work. And I was working with NBC at the time. I was a host of a business show profiling all these amazing organizations across the country. And after the first season of that show, my executive producer at NBC said, "Hey, we want you to work with an executive coach." And I didn't know what an executive coach was at the time. "We want you to work with an executive coach so you can understand what it's like to work with top level CEOs that you're interviewing, so you can get a better inside look of these men and women." Little did I know, when I was working with her and basically being a journalist, learning about her work with these CEOs and executives she worked with, slowly but surely, I was getting interested as well. And she started asking me questions. And that led me to slowly but surely doing some personal development workshops. I mean, I remember that first personal development workshop that I went to, and I've gone to so many over the years. That's when the layers started being peeled back, if you will. I think a lot of us were kind of like homes that need a new paint job, and typically people will just paint over the old paint, and you just get all this paint. But at some point, you're really going to do yourself a service if you scrape back all that old paint, right? And get back to the core and sand it down and prime it and put the paint on. But we like to put paint on top of everything. And that's what I was doing, frankly, with my issues, with my pain, etc. By the way, you've done personal development work. You facilitate these workshops. One time when I was working at NBC and I was leaving a shoot and I was going to a personal development workshop for the weekend, and someone said, "Hey man, what happens at those?" And I was like, "We just cry a lot."
But
actually we do cry a lot. And this makes me think about too, man. I was giving a talk once down at Georgia State, and I'm sure you probably have an opportunity to speak there before.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time a kid came up to me after a talk, and he said, "Hey, how do you get verified on social media? I see you got that verified badge on Twitter." And I was like, "Well, tell me more about, very rarely do I give you an answer. I'm always going to ask a question like you do."
No, it's really annoying. Yeah.
Hey, you're pretty great at it as well, my friend. That's us doing a public service. And I asked him a few questions like, "Well, tell me, why do you want to get verified?" And he said, "To prove that it's me." And I was like, "Well, is there another you that I should be aware of?" And he started laughing, and he's like, "No." I said, "Well, tell me, why do you really want to be verified?" And he was like, "To show that I'm important." James, that's the same thing I wanted when I wanted to get on TV, when I wanted to be on the show. I wanted to show that I was important. And what I told that kid in that moment was something I'm sure he didn't want to hear, was that no blue check mark can verify you, right? We've all been verified the day that we were born, regardless of what your faith is beyond. We have been verified the day that we are born. And that's what I came to realize as I was doing these personal development workshops, as I was getting coached myself, as I learned to invest in the coach and how beautiful it is to have that experience. I advocate therapy for everyone, but I think there's a strong difference between therapy and coaching. And I've done a whole bunch of both, and I love them both. And that was the shift for me. And also, just briefly, as my television career, as I was choosing it to wind down with NBC, I realized, James, that I was getting so much joy working and coaching some of the younger employees that were on the production team that I was working on. Sometimes I'll get more joy out of that than doing some of the actual work that I was doing. And that really started me on the line of getting a little bit curious about that work.
Interesting. And especially as, I would assume once you shifted more into the journalism work, right, you became naturally you're already a curious person, but just like you said, you're hanging out with all these individuals that are doing some pretty cool things and getting some pretty cool opportunities. It can't help but open the brain and open the eyes up to maybe there is more. Right. And especially for you coming out of a small town in Michigan, smitten with the mitten and, coming from a small town and also, I think you kind of mentioned earlier that you didn't get a lot of validation when you were growing up as well, right? That's something that you weren't given. I would assume, but basically what I'm hearing is that's either like you weren't getting that from teachers, maybe you were getting from coaches because you pursued athletics or whatnot, but maybe you weren't getting it from family or whatnot. Why do you think validation was something that you wanted?
Well, it's a couple of things. And I think you bring up a really interesting point about, well, let me rewind, the validation that I crave. I had what you would call, and I got to make sure when I share the story, James, that I'm not complaining and I'm not sharing a woe is me story by no means, because I'm appreciative of everything that has happened to me. I believe people that showed up in my life or even didn't show up are doing the best that they could. And it has served me in many, many ways. Growing up, I experienced a decent amount of what you would call instability. Before I graduated from high school, I moved nearly 15 times in my small hometown. Between my mother and father, each of them were divorced 3 different times, so a total of 6 different divorces. There was no quote unquote stability in my life. I moved all the time. Figures that I really needed in my life at certain times just weren't there, those adult figures. I was fortunate and I was blessed that sports were my saving grace. People always, when they're going through a tough time, they ask for support or advice. One of the biggest things I tell them to do is have somewhere to be. You get in trouble when you don't have somewhere to be. And for me, I was fortunate when I had somewhere to be, when I had to be a football practice, when I had to be a track practice, when I had to be a baseball practice or basketball practice. And that's where I got the parenting type of vibe and the energy from people being at those events. And so I think that's where the validation came from, because a lot of that stuff that I really wanted at home, frankly, wasn't there. I don't think, again, you think about your parents, especially now, when you look at your parents as you get older, and I'm a parent now, you really do realize folks are doing what they could, the best that they could with the information that they had available. To be clear, my mom's a ridiculously loving person, my biggest supporter. She may be watching right now. My dad equally had my back in different ways. So that was a kind of the genesis, if you will, of me kind of seeking out that validation. But also, you mentioned something earlier, and I think having the opportunity in my television career to meet so many dynamic individuals and interview so many amazing people, from Grammy and Oscar Award winners, former heads of state, people you see on TV, you read about, everyone to that mother that just lost her kid to gun violence. You just see all these different worlds, and I think up until that point, I always thought, James, life was kind of like being in a corner, and you got option A or you got option B. You have these 2 corners that you're looking at in a room. Okay, I can do X or I can do Y. It wasn't until I started doing personal development work that I realized I could turn around. I wasn't stuck to just option A or option B. Like, yo, I can turn around. Look at this fireplace back here right now. Like, there is more open to us. When I say more, I'm not just talking about more money and more resources, though all those things are great. But what an opportunity to take advantage of this life. It makes me think about a friend of mine. His grandfather once told him, and you'll love this, he said, live an interesting life. No one wants to talk to an old person who doesn't have interesting stories to tell. And I want to live an interesting life, man. And I've been fortunate enough through certain windows to get a glimpse of certain things. And that has allowed me, and this is a continuous journey, to be clear, has allowed me to expand. Where for a lot of my life, James, I contracted, especially when the moment got big. I would go, what? You like me? What? You like me? Let me contract and pull back from you. What? I'm about to get a raise. Things are going good in my career. Oh, let me contract because you might take it away from me. I had to learn how to accept, how to receive, and step into it, if you will. And it's still a journey, by the way.
Well, of course, yeah. That never gets completely easier, but it is work worth doing. And I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your childhood. I'm curious. I'm curious if I can ask another question about it. I see you being very cautious. I hear you being very cautious about the way that you speak about it, right? Like, you say this isn't a woe is me tale. This isn't a, I don't want you to picture me like started from the bottom. Now I'm here. Anybody, right? Like, I hear you sharing that, and I understand it, right? I understand that that is not something that you want individuals to feel. You don't want sympathy. You're not looking for empathy, as it may be if people have a similar journey. But at some point, I'm wondering who gets to hear a little bit more of that story, because the way that you share it makes it seem like it was like, hey, times were tough. We had a few things going on, and didn't have a pot to piss in, but hey, what I mean? People smile. And every day you wake up, you got to smile. You know what I mean? So, anyway, so then I was on MTV, and then I was on Nickelodeon, and then, here we are. Right? I mean, but it's interesting because there's a lot of grit that you had to build during that time, right? There's a lot of self-esteem crushing and rebuilding, and there's a lot of stuff that you went through that has shaped the individual that you are, right? And that's powerful. And so I'm just curious, I'm not necessarily asking you to go deeper into that right now, but I'm wondering, when do you allow yourself to tell more of that story as opposed to just like making sure that individuals don't just feel bad for you?
Yeah. Well, one, a lot of the story. I mean, there are the conversations that you and I have had. Of course, there are people in my life that I 100% trust.
Yeah.
That I'll have conversations with. I'll get raw and I'll get rugged with, and just be real with them. You're one of those people. There's not a lot of those people, but you're one of those people that even if we don't talk for months and you respond to my text 4 weeks later, which you typically do, I'll share that with people. A couple of things come up. One, people, we talk about grit and resilience a lot nowadays, right?
Sure,
and how important it is. But I think there's another. They're fancy words. They're set right now. They're all the rage. They've been the rage for a while. I think another word we have to really look at a lot is compassion as well. I don't think we talk about compassion enough. I think something else we can look at. Let me put it this way. I'll say it like, I don't know, you're the age that you come from, but I come from this interesting age where social media, for example, people, a lot of time, you see me even thinking in my head right now, how I'm calculating, the computer's going right now.
Yep.
A lot of people ask me, how come I don't show my kids' faces on social media? You get to see my kids' faces on social media because you're in a closed circle, the green circle folks on Instagram, where the close friends get to see. But not every one of those 19, 20,000 people that follow me get to see it. Yep. I'm of the age, James, where when I was a kid, I don't know if you remember this. I remember going over to a family member's house or a friend's house. And if things went good, you hung out. At some point, something magical happened. You know what happened? Somebody went to another room or they pulled open a drawer in an old china cabinet and they brought out a photo album. They brought out a photo album. They would open it up and it'd be stained yellow and the sticky paper behind these photos. And it told a story of their life. How intimate is that? The reason why I don't show the photos of my kids on social media to strangers is because one thing I truly believe, James, is not everyone deserves to hear your story. Not everyone has earned hearing your story. In this social media age of authenticity and transparency, I see people sharing things, and the first thing that goes on my mind is when I'm seeing somebody crying again on a TikTok, is what you just shared. Have you shared that with a friend?
Yeah.
Have you shared that with the family? When something traumatic happens to you, is your first outlet your phone? Is your first outlet your computer? I'm fortunate nowadays, and I thank goodness these things didn't exist in the early, when I was coming of age, if you will, but I can reach out to people that I know will pick up the phone where I can have some real heart-to-heart conversations, where I can get a little bit more raw, and a little bit more valuable. I will share things on social media to bring people in, to let them know that I'm no different from them. When you read the book, that I peel back a lot of layers on that book. If you keep a lot of stuff inside, which I'm really good at keeping stuff inside, at some point it's going to explode. And I don't even know if you know this, man, but a few years ago, how that manifested to me when I was going through those health challenges, when I was getting MRIs and wearing heart monitors and all that kind of fun stuff. I went through a period of time in 2016, man, where I was a secret cigarette smoker.
I did not know that.
I never thought in a million years. I have a grandmother that died from emphysema. I have family members that have been smokers their whole life. My mother still smokes. It's a choice we make. And by the way, I just now remember when you could go to bars or clubs and you leave from college and you come back smelling like smoke. It took me to be in the age that I am now to realize when I went to school every day, I smelled like I just came from a club. Because I was in my mom's car with the windows up in the winter in Michigan, surrounded by smoke. Coming in wondering why I'm shaking because I had that needed a nicotine hit. But a few years back, I developed a secret cigarette smoking habit. And I never thought in a million years that's something I would do. The stress had gotten so high. It was so intense of being a year into my marriage and going through some challenges, of having 2 kids that were a year old and learning what it meant to be a father when I really didn't have one regularly in my life, trying to figure out some financial things, etc. Where on paper, on the internet, everything looked good, right? Everything looked good on the internet, but internally I was in alleys in Santa Monica smoking cigarettes, and not just any cigarette. I was smoking Camel Crush cigarettes. Woo! These came in a neon package, man. You had to click this thing to ignite the menthol. Like I really went in, bro. One day, just this story is going somewhere. One day I was smoking one of those cigarettes in an alley, and I was hiding. Here's how gangster it was. I brought a gardening glove with me everywhere so I could smoke with the glove on so my wife wouldn't smell it. I brought I had extra t-shirts. When I was deep into this.
You went hard, dude.
I went hard, bro. I was wearing this. One day I was smoking a cigarette in a Santa Monica street alley wearing this bright green gardening glove, and a homeless man walked by me. And he asked if he could bum a cigarette. And I was like, yeah, of course, man. Looked like he had seen better days. Gave him a few cigarettes. Lit a cigarette for him. And then he said to me, he's like, yo, what's up with that gardening glove, man? And he's like, what's up with that green glove? He took a genuine interest. We just sitting there smoking like smokers do outside, having conversation. And I was like, oh, my wife doesn't know that I smoke. And so I wear it so she can't smell it. Bro, this dude looked at me like he felt sorry for me, as if we had reversed roles, as if I was the homeless one, not knowing where my next meal was coming from, and he was the one with the home, etc. And he said something to me that set me off on a positive trajectory. He looked at me and he said, yo, man, you got to figure that out. He was an angel that day. He said, you got to figure that out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What a poignant, powerful moment. Because that's to your point. I wasn't sharing those things. I was keeping everything to myself. I had to go about it alone. And that's if there's something that and I knew this. And so it's not just like there was a new thing that I knew that I had to talk to people, and therapy is important and coaching is important. You were in my life at that time. I could have called you at any time, but there was some shame, there was some embarrassment that was going on. So it wasn't like for lack of know-how, it was just a lack of willingness, right? We all know what we should do in so many regards of our life, but the question is, are you doing it? And I wasn't doing it, and that's why I had a Camel Crush smoking habit that nobody knew about. And the day my wife found the Camel Crush cigarettes in my car,
How'd that go?
First, it was actually pretty fascinating because she found them in a place where I was lazy, didn't hide them good enough. She found them, and I thought she was going to be angry at me, James. Mm-hmm. And I just had this moment when I was like, I've been smoking. I'm really stressed out. I don't have much else to really say about it. I need help. And she was more concerned about me than like mad at me.
That's a real
listen, she didn't find some pipe. I wasn't freebasing. I wasn't having
you were better at hiding those.
Yeah. Exactly. But what I appreciated in that moment was the concern, was the care. Like what can we do? So that was a long-winded story, but some background.
But she didn't know. She really didn't know.
Man, the gardening glove, man.
Wow. There you go.
And the gum, man. I was chewing gum like I owned stock in Wrigley.
Like a Cubs fan.
Brushing to the gums bleeding.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. Brene Brown talks about, we talks a lot about shame and vulnerability and whatnot. And vulnerability, she talks about how vulnerability for vulnerability's sake is not effective. It's not a good teaching tool, right? You shouldn't just like walk in front of your meeting and be like, I got something to say, right? Like it's not like vulnerability for vulnerability's sake is not always the move. And we see that a lot on social media as well. And what you said was so powerful, where it was like, do you mean to tell me that if you're having a tough day, the first thing you're doing is picking up the phone and not going to your contacts list, but instead going to your Instagram, your TikTok, and your whatnot, right? It's like, when you pick up your phone to do something because you're in an emotional place, what's your first move? And right now, I think you're right. There's a lot of people that jump onto Facebook and jump onto whatnot. And it's a little like screaming into a giant cave. And I don't know how much it helps, but I think it's fascinating the way that it all comes back to validation, right? Some of the most powerful things, a powerful gift that we can give somebody is for them to feel heard, seen, and respected. And so that's what validation does, right? Validation makes you feel all of those things, and that's why it's so powerful. But hearing your story and the way that you articulated it was incredible. And I think, I mean, shout out to this dude. How many times have we had, I mean, I've had a number of conversations where I've just come upon somebody or someone has come upon me and they dropped the nugget and I said, you will impact the rest of my life, right? These 30 seconds, this minute and a half, this whatever is one of the most powerful moments of my, just something that's going to stick. It's powerful.
I've had that so much, and not only like, and by the way, even I said homeless dude, like this was a person without a home, right? But even the labels that we put on people, I don't know this man's story, changed my life. I'm sure like you traveling, prior to the pandemic, traveling nonstop for speaking engagements. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many cars I've gotten into, or the Uber drivers or Lyft drivers that the most, I feel like I have angels when I get in those cars. I've had some of the most powerful, amazing conversations. And just briefly with people picking up the phone to cry into, not only are they deciding to share that information into the phone immediately, you know what else they're doing? They take the time to pick music. Like they're adding a soundtrack. It's like you are like doing takes. Like it's impressive. I do. We joke about this, but I do really invite folks if they are going through a challenging time. There's someone on their phone that they can reach out to. James, over the course of our friendship, man, you and I have been able to be that for each other. I know you're someone that's not going to judge me. Mm-hmm. You're someone that also, this is why people, I don't think, pick up the phone, James. Because yes, sometimes all we're going to do as friends is listen. And I know there are moments I know like all I'm doing today is listening. Mm-hmm. But there are other times when I'm going to ask a question. Very rarely am I going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to ask a question. But I think a lot of times people don't pick up the phone because they do what you're great at. And that is you keep it real. Mm-hmm. You keep it honest. You're not going to flub and say, oh, it's going to be okay. It might not be okay. Like it might not be okay. Some people, maybe it wasn't meant to be. Oh, was it not meant to be? Or did you give up on that project? Because there's so many different things we tell people, but I know you're one of those people that keep it real. And sometimes you say some of those tough things that are hard to hear, but that are needed to hear.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly hope so. In the moment, I'm like, oh God, here we go, truth serum. But yeah, I mean, it's the way that you deliver. You got. I mean, this as someone who has an extreme amount of emotional intelligence. You got to know when the right time to insert yourself is, right? Like you got to feel it, and then you got to jump in. My buddy Jeff Dess talks about it kind of like we're doing double dutch, right? Like you gotta wait for that moment. You got to count yourself in. You know what I'm saying? You're like, okay, right? And like so sometimes it's like that where it's like this is the moment where maybe truth needs to come in or something like that.
And it's a gift.
Love.
It is a gift to be able to know when to jump in. Otherwise, you can get tangled up in those ropes.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Antonio, before we get tangled up in any more ropes, I think we're at a good spot right now to jump into a quick segment. Are you down to have a little fun with me, brother?
Always.
Amazing. Antonio, we're going to do a segment of the show right now that's called Things You Didn't Know About Me, But Are Now Glad That You Did. Something you should know, Antonio, is that the name of the segment changes every single time, but the meaning stays the same. So, Antonio, here's how it'll work. You and I will each share a couple of random facts about ourselves. I'll go first rather than just throwing you onto the spot, and we'll just chop it up a little bit, and then we'll come back because I got some questions about your book for sure. So, Antonio, let me. You in? You in?
I'm all in.
Let's go, baby. All right. So I hate everything having to do with skis, whether they are snow skis or water skis. I have tried snow skiing 3 times. It has ended horribly all 3 times. And the last time that I tried it, I fell on the bunny hill and I couldn't untwist my legs. And the bunny hill is like before the actual hill, right? Like there's no lift up the bunny hill. The jump's only 15 feet, right? Like you learn to like practice stopping or maybe do a light turn. Like I fell on the bunny hill and got so pretzeled up that I started crying. And I was like, you know what? Maybe that's it. And also much to the chagrin of my aunt and uncle who have a house up on a beautiful lake in upstate New York, I have tried water skiing. I don't even know how many times at this point, and I have never gotten up, and I still have the water in my nose from failure. And so me and skis don't get along.
All right, I dig it. I like those, and I feel you on the skiing. By the way, it's not my cup of tea either. I'd rather sit in the lodge and have some hot cocoa. I'll share a couple of things with you. First and foremost, I think native English speakers should not say croissant with an accent. When someone says croissant, it really bothers me because my whole thing is this: if you're gonna go all croissant, why aren't you rolling your R on burrito? It's a double standard. You're gonna go all croissant, like yeah. Let me get an Americanos with Rome. Let me get a blueberry muffin. Let me croissant. Stop, right? If you're not rolling your R on burrito, you cannot say croissant. Second, random little fact. This is gonna be interesting. Once I had kids, James, this may happen to you. I started carrying a pocket knife. It's all of a sudden the Michigan boy in me that I grew up everywhere where I'm from in Michigan, man. I was raised not far from a NASCAR speedway. Not that that has anything to do with anything, but everyone I knew kind of my life, the men in my life carried pocket knives. Now I'm pretty much guaranteed at all times of my life to have a pocket knife with me. And I think you should. Matter of fact, I know what I'm getting you when your baby's born. I'm not gonna tell you. Get ready. Third thing I'll say real quick. I got time to get another one in real quick.
Yeah, we can bounce. We can play tennis, man. I mean, but you can keep going too. Whatever you want to do, go ahead.
Okay, might be a little contentious. I don't even know if this actually aligns with this segment, but I believe that the British version of The Office is the only one that people should watch.
Ooh. Okay. You're thinking Michael Scott, get out of here.
Shots fired. And,
shots fired.
David Brent, Ricky Gervais.
Wow. Okay. Now, did you give the American version of The Office its due diligence, and you're just like, this isn't it?
I'm fortunate that, like a lot of Americans, unfortunate that I saw the British version first, and that's just my sense of humor. Then when I started watching the American version, it just, as much as I appreciate the characters and acting on it, just wasn't my cup of tea, wasn't my speed.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah. This is you're right. I think you just split the audience a little bit. That's totally fine. I have only seen a handful of episodes of The Office. I have some friends that have been on it, which is super cool. And so I watched to support them. I have one of my best friends here in Minneapolis is a diehard Office fan. She would normally be on here commenting, but she's actually downstairs talking to Tina right now.
That's funny.
And so, but I can't wait to go downstairs and tell her this after the show. Okay, there you go. You know, you talked about pet peeves, and first off, the croissant is hysterical. Does this also bother you when, like, people who have Italian last names, when they're talking about Italian food, they're having a normal conversation, like, yeah, you know, we went and bought some bread, and then we got the manicotta, and then we got the risotto, right? Like, do you can't stand when people like just put random words like that into it?
Oh, let me tell you something, man. That's why I carry a pocket knife. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding there. I don't get it. I don't appreciate it. I'm not mad at them. I'm not mad at them. Do what you got to do. But I think we can do.
You are judging them though.
Oh, heavily, heavily judging.
Do you also dislike people who call it Target instead of Target?
Oh my goodness. We're going down a rabbit. I'm gonna have a lot of enemies right now. Yeah, let's just go with Target, y'all. Let's just go with Target. Shout out Minneapolis headquarters. Let's just go with Target.
There you go. There you go. My friend calls it the Red Circle Boutique. I said, we're taking it too far at this point. At this point, we're taking it too far.
They've done a great job. I like the Red Circle Boutique. They've got some amazing designers in there doing some cool things. But Target just not for my liking.
That's it. You shared a pet peeve. I'll share one as well. I can't stand when guys tie their ties too short. Ooh. Your tie is not an arrow for your belly button. Okay.
That's funny.
Get it we all know where the belly button is. We don't need a highlight for it, right? You know what I'm saying? And so, like, get it to the belt buckle, but then also don't go past the belt buckle. That's somehow more awkward than a shorter tie. And so, just like, what's going on here? Get the switch to a bow tie if you can't handle the knot.
I'm with you 100% on that, and you're making me laugh because I'm thinking about all those times I put a tie on in a hotel bathroom, and I've like had to retie it like 4 different times to get the right length. I was about to say length is important, and we'll just leave it there.
There it is. Go team. I think that's a good place to move on. And so let's run from that quickly. You know, Antonio, it's cool because when you You have been through a number of different changes in your world, as you just mentioned, right? You're working in the corporate world and craft after being a college athlete, and then you're moving to the city and hearing a whole bunch of no's before you start getting booked, Nickelodeon, NBC, and then you have this amazing coaching experience. And then it transformed into your own coaching profession as well. And then on top of that, you became a speaker. And now, you just got a lot of things in the air. And it's incredible because you haven't ever just been like, I'm going to do one thing and keep going, right? Like and there's something noble about that, right? It's kind of an older generation idea of like, well, I got a job at the cracker factory, and so I'm going to retire from the cracker factory.
Right.
There's something noble about loyalty. For sure. And I think there's something to be learned from that as well. Not necessarily we need to go back into it, but I think there is something to be learned from it a little bit. And so for you come out and you have this book that's dropping, and it's called Stop Living Your Life on Autopilot. Where are you seeing that people live their life on autopilot? Where is that coming up that you were like, you know what? I've met enough folks that are in the same whatever routine, and it's time that folks need to break it. Like what inspired this?
Yeah. Well, I will say what's interesting, James, is that even though I've had quote unquote different chapters in my life and different careers, the through line for all of them is me being a storyteller. I was a storyteller when I was going into Winn-Dixie grocery stores in South Florida trying to sell products. I was a storyteller when I was a host on Nickelodeon. I was a storyteller when I was a journalist with NBC, PBS, BET. Of course, as a coach, of course, on stages, I'm a storyteller. So if there is a through line in all those, it's been that. When I transitioned from doing a lot of college speaking and doing corporate speaking, a constant refrain I heard after my talks with people would come up to me and they basically would say, I'm not as happy as I look on the internet. I'm not as successful as I look on LinkedIn. So many men and women had done everything that society told them to do. They went to got their education. They got that quote unquote good job that I talked about earlier. Maybe they got married. They had kids. They got the house. They got the garage. They got the 401k. Maybe even they got some index funds that are treating them pretty good right now, right? They did everything that they were supposed to do, yet they're feeling a void. They're feeling empty inside. And so many people have found that they were living on autopilot. In many ways, they feel like they've been on a conveyor belt that, as we go back in history, society built for us. Everything that they accomplished, that education, that good job, getting that mortgage, all these different things. Let's be clear, that has been planned. It's not happenstance that these things happen and you're encouraged to do certain things, etc. So at some point, people realized they took their hands off of the wheel and started living by default. I like to tell this story. There's an article in the New York Times, and this really gets to the emphasis of the book and what it really digs into. There's a story in the New York Times about 4 years ago, and they're interviewing two co-founders of a fashion label. And they had started this company in New York in the 90s and the 2000s in New York City, when New York was a little bit different in the 90s than it was in the 2000s. And at some point during the interview, one of the co-founders said, "Oh man, I miss the old New York," romanticizing about what it was like back, it was a little bit more grimy, a little bit more grit, etc. And his co-founder corrected him, the other one, and said, "You don't miss the old New York. What you miss is the old you. You miss who you were during that time, how you showed up, your optimism, your hustle, how bold you were, how courageous you were. All those things have gone on to the sidelines while you pursued this quote unquote good." And I had experienced that myself, where everything on paper on the resume looked good, but I realized I stopped doing some of those things that got me to where I was, just a few years ago. And I wanted to write this book to talk about some things that we can do to start living on purpose again, if you will, to shift gears. And to be clear, this book isn't about quitting your job and moving to Bali. Right. It's not about ending your relationship. It's not about moving to a new city. I don't believe in geographic cures or new profession cures. I believe that we can find happiness right where we are, but we have to put our hands back on the wheel once again, and do some of those things that we stopped doing. If I may, I like to think about it like this for people in their professions. And this is a great way to know if you're on autopilot. For those folks who are thankfully employed right now, I'd like you to think back, and this may be tough during the pandemic, but it still will work. Think back to the last 30 days at work. And based on the last 30 days at work, would your company rehire you? Mm-hmm. Just based on the last 30 days.
Yeah.
Right. I like to ask people how much. Think back to when you interviewed for that job and how fired up you were. Think about when you got that phone call for the second interview. Think about that day you got the email or you got the phone call that said you got the job. Think about how you showed up that first week on the job, that first month, that first year. Now ask yourself, how much of that man or woman still exists? How fired up are you, right? Of course, it naturally goes away, but there are things we can do to reactivate that quickly. Relationships, man. Based on, folks, about to get uncomfortable, based on the last 30 days of your relationship, if you're married, got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, if your partner had to make a decision to recommit to you based on the last 30 days, would they immediately say yes? Mm-hmm. Would they? I can tell you many times over the course of my life, James' answer would have been no. Mm-hmm. Especially there are times when I was like in India doing keynotes when my wife's at home with our twins by herself for a couple of weeks, right? I mean, so, and then we can even think back to, remember when we first knew we had a crush on that person? And we decided to get the audacity, the nerve to ask them out on a date. Remember all the time you took planning where you were going to go on that first date? Remember how interested you were on that first date? Remember the courting process that took place? Remember those handwritten? I mean, how much of that still shows up? So we've stopped doing a lot of the things that got us to where we are. I'm not saying we have to do everything and bring everything back, but there are some key things that can make a big difference. So I hope that answered your question.
Oh, it did, man. It did. And it got me excited as well, for sure. And I think, I've heard you talk about the 30-day concept before, and it's still, we got a new 30 days, so I need to think about it again. It's always a good concept to come back to, for sure. So, Antonio, what was a time when you were operating on autopilot? What was the time for you where you were just like, I don't know, you were just kind of like going with the flow? Was that during your craft times? When was that for you, when you were just kind of, I guess, for lack of a better word, felt like you settled?
There was a time as recent as 4 years ago, frankly, in my speaking career. There was a time as an entrepreneur, and you know this very well as a professional, that sometimes there's no guaranteed paycheck every 2 weeks. There's no guaranteed insurance or pension plan, all these different things. But there was a time when I was on autopilot in my speaking career when I kind of treated it, James, like it was a hobby in many ways, as opposed to a profession. And if I was my own boss, which I was, and I looked at my efforts over the past 30 days, would I have rehired me for that job? I don't know, because I was putting more energy and emphasis on social media sometimes than I was making phone calls and building those strong relationships and making leads and following up, the power of following up. And I wasn't, again, I was fortunate that things were still coming in, but I knew things could have came in even more, could have been even better, more successful for me. But I was treating it for a moment when I was coasting, when I was smoking those cigarettes, a little bit like a hobby. I forgot that I chose to do that. I think sometimes we forget that I chose this. When we're complaining, when we're frustrated, when we're unhappy, whether it's about our job, whether it's about our lot in life, whether it's about our marriage, whether it's about our mortgage, at some point we have to look in the mirror and say, I chose this.
Yeah, right.
And most people are unwilling to do that. And I had to come to that point, like, I chose this. So either you're going to need to get a 9-to-5 job that has a paycheck that shows up every 2 weeks, or you have to get some things in order. It wasn't for lack of know-how. It wasn't for a lack of skill set. It wasn't for lack of relationships, etc. It was for a lack of, I had to recommit to my standards and my values. And that's really what it's a lot about when we talk about stop living on autopilot, man. One, we have to remember, and I had to remember, that you have a say in this. At some point, we fall prey to everything. We forget. We become the victim. We point our fingers at everyone else, but we forget that we have a say in this. Right. And I had to remember that. We have to remember that as much as people care about us, our family, our friends, our spouse, our parents, our professors, you name it, our bosses, they care, but no one can care more than we do. And if someone cares more about our life and our goals and our aspirations, something's wrong. It's great that they care, but if someone else cares more, something's wrong. So it was as recent as just a few years ago where I was coasting, and I was on cruise control. And for those folks that are maybe experiencing that right now, I invite you to come at this from a place of not beating yourself up, but come at it from a place of getting curious. Come at it from a place of wondering. Come at it from a place of, as opposed to being aggressive and beating yourself up, that I'm really good at doing, and come from a place of compassion and see what those next steps you can take to slowly turn things around if you choose to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's real. Where are the places in life where we where we allow compassion to also not just be something other people can give to us, but we can give to ourselves as well. Yeah, that's beautiful. Antonio, I got another question for you, and it kind of goes along the same line of this, but a lot of times in people's lives, fear is a driver, right? And fear is a big driver, and fear is what often allows individuals to stay comfortable, to stay in autopilot, because there's something powerful about security, right? And we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We got safety and security down here at the bottom, and we're good, we're taken care of. And for most people, that's good enough. And, in some ways I can understand that and can respect that. But not everybody is into that. But a lot of times it's fear that holds us in those places. For you, Antonio, you are someone who is to spend time with you and to get to experience your brain. I mean, even as we are right now, there are points where it is, I don't know, I'll call it intimidating for me sometimes, because I'm like, man, I wish I was a quarter as articulate as this man, or I wish I had the word packaging that he does for the things that he says. And man, it seems like everything is so put together and on point. And it's a joy to spend time with you. It is always something that I look forward to. And I know that I will leave different than when I showed up, and it's beautiful. But I'm wondering for you, as we think about living our lives on autopilot, and fear occasionally being a reason why we stay on autopilot, are there any fears that you have, and how do they show up?
First, I appreciate everything you just said. And for me, it's a reminder for a guy that can find himself in some insecure moments, that sometimes we have to remind ourselves to see others the way other people see us. Mm-hmm. What a gift for just what you just shared just now. Like, we have to see ourselves the way others see us, and what a gift that is, because I see you, man, the exact same way. So I just appreciate you for sharing that. I have a big fear. First, I think I want to set this up by saying this. I think, we talk about, I think there can be 3 dates on a tombstone. Mm-hmm. They were born, the day we give up, and the day we die. I really do believe there can be 3 dates on a tombstone: the day we are born, the day we give up, the day we stop trying, and the day we die. If there's a fear that I have, James, it is one day bumping into someone randomly at an airport, or on the busy street of Minneapolis or New York City or some random place, and like, Antonio. And they knew me back, say, in the early 2000s, maybe the kid that was hungry just moved to New York City, or maybe even later. And they knew me when I had that vigor, that excitement, that optimism. Like, there wasn't nothing this guy wasn't going to do. Like, things may be tough, but let's make some things happen. Let's lean into it. Yeah. But I'd bump into this person. They would see me, and we'd have this conversation. And at some point I could see something in their eyes, even though they don't directly say it, but their eyes are basically saying, what happened? What happened, man? Yeah. What happened to that dude I once knew? What happened to that dude that was optimistic? What happened to that dude that was going to do X, that was going to do Y? What happened to that dude that wasn't going to settle? What happened? And they wouldn't say it out loud, but you would be able to see it in their demeanor and their shift in their energy. So if there's a fear that I have, it'd be bumping into someone who I knew back when. Mm-hmm. Back when could be, it doesn't need to be 20 years ago or 15 years ago. Yeah. But you see that look of resignation on their face, like, oh, he threw in the towel. Oh, he gave up. Oh, and that would break my heart, man. That would truly break my heart. And it's a weird fear, but it's one that truly drives me. And I'm fortunate to be close enough to my family and friends that these are the men and women that would say, yo, son, what's up? Let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about your decisions, etc. But it's something about a stranger or an old friend that you know that when you can see it in their eyes. And I think I've had some of those conversations over the years when I was going through some tough spells when you could tell they were like, oh, he's going through something right now, but they just didn't feel comfortable enough. It wasn't that moment to really say something. So that's a fear that I don't want to say it drives me. I don't wake up every single day like, I don't want to bump into Deborah in the O'Hare one day. It doesn't drive me like that, but it's something that that's on my mind every now and then.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. You know, I mean, there's I think I've said on here before that, you know, in my brain, I struggle. I feel like inside of my body, there's this wrestling match between legacy and presence. And it's a lot of what you're talking about right now, where, you know, it's fascinating for me to think about because like I care so much about like what's going to be said when I'm gone. Right. And like, or just before I'm gone or whatnot, right? Like if we had an opportunity to watch our eulogy, and I know some people do a living funeral. I think that's an interesting concept. But or a living eulogy, but I am in constant flux with what that means because like I want to take advantage of this moment. Right. I mean, you know, Tina and I have a baby on the way and super exciting. We just entered the third trimester and there's part of me that's like, you know, a good father is a present father. And like my brain is often, you know, 10 steps ahead. Like, well, what's this going to be here? What's that? You know, like, I mean, I'm already imagining like, all right, who we playing golf with? All right, who we going here with? All right, what colleges we looking at? Right. I'm like, I don't even know how to change a diaper yet. Like I gotta bring it back. And I don't want to miss those moments because I was so forward thinking, right? But then on the other side of it, it's also this idea of like, I'm trying to live a life that's a really badass story, you know, like you were talking about your friend earlier, live a life full of interesting stories. And so that's why what you're talking about definitely resonates with me. And I'd be curious to throw it back to you of like, as someone who cares a little bit, you know, we'll call that legacy or we'll call that the way others see us or, you know, how whatever shoe fits better for you. How do you balance those dreams or those goals with being in the moment?
It's great because I love you bring up the kids and your spouse as well, because I truly believe that we are no good to them if we're hiding our gifts. If we're not alive doing what we were supposed to do, I believe we're no good. I could go get a 9-to-5, right? But I know for a fact that that would kill me in some way internally. And my wife and my kids would not get me fully the way they need to get me. Even if that means that sometimes daddy's gone for 7 days straight. You're going to enjoy that 3 days of daddies you got more than you enjoy that 7 if I'm alive doing what I want to do. That's just a quick aside. I think there are things we still have to do. Yes, there's some changes I make to my schedule. Maybe I'll do more higher paying gigs as opposed to a lot smaller, lower paying gigs, etc. That's another thing. In terms of, and I got to rewind real quick when I talk about that person bumping into us. And like say, oh, what happened? It doesn't need to be always the heavy stuff. It'd be the equivalent of me bumping to you in 2021. Now that you have a kid and all that kind of stuff. And the moment would be like, yo, I thought you was going to do diner talks, man. You've been talking about diner talks for a long time, but you know, it can be as simple as that. But now it happened. And I know what this brings you. The same way with my podcast. Like I've been talking about my podcast forever. And listen, you know, I got a sponsor for my podcast. It's me. This podcast is brought to you by Antonio Neves. Payment goes out of my pocket. But if I didn't do that, I would not be alive in that capacity. I think I'm missing the boat on your question in terms of what was it? How to balance the fear?
Legacy versus presence.
Legacy versus presence.
Especially when it comes to like, you know, like living on autopilot or whatnot. And, you know, because you're talking about these far out conversations that you may have with somebody, but also not wanting to miss the moments.
You know, it's interesting. My mind went here. It's heavy, but I know you're okay with me keeping it real. My brain went here for some reason. My father, 83 years old, Al, has dementia, and he's in a nursing home. He can no longer talk. Stuck to a bed, can't walk, none of that kind of fun stuff. This is a guy that I can't. Just breaks in my heart that this is where he's at right now towards the end of his life in his 80s. When I talk about presence and legacy, and it makes me think about my dad and all the trips that I've taken to see him at that nursing home. Sometimes I just fly him for a day or 2 days or something like that. And even though he can't talk, I already know what he's saying to me when he sees me walk. If I have that moment of recognition, that quick moment of recognition where he recognizes me when I walk in the door, I see a glimmer of like, hey, but then it kind of will go away. But I also know what Al Neves would say to me. And he's probably thinking at that moment, what are you doing here? Be with your family. Like that. I'm okay. Like, he's like, I'm okay. He's always about handle your family, handle your business. I'm going to be okay. So I don't know why my brain went there, James, but it made me think about that, not feeling guilty about certain things. And even how my dad, even in this moment right now, that's extremely vulnerable for him and, sad for me. I know he would be saying, what are you doing here getting on a plane? I know you, what your life is like. I know you're on the road nonstop already. You need to make a decision to not make these trips here. I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
Your family's important. That's what you need to be with. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's where my brain went.
Oh, man, I think it was beautiful.
Got heavy up in this joint, right?
I love it. I love it, Antonio. I love it, and I respect the hell out of you. And I'm so pumped that you wanted to come through the diner, my guy. This is Antonio Neves, the man, the myth, the legend, coming out of LA now because he's fancy like that.
You're funny.
Don't let those humble Michigan upbringings fool you. No, I'm just playing. Antonio, it's been so special getting to kick it with you here in the diner, sharing a milkshake with you, hearing the wisdom, being excited about this project that you got coming out, right? You got the podcast, The Best Thing, which is awesome. And also you got this book, right? Stop Living on Autopilot. And it's always inspiring to get to spend time with you and hear your wisdom, your thoughts, and obviously your stories as well. You are truly a naturally gifted storyteller, my brother.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. This was a joy. I've been looking forward to doing this with you. I can't wait to be able to sit down with you in person. I'm so glad you're doing this. It's amazing. And by the way, the episode of the Best Thing podcast with James Robillata is one of the top 5 episodes in terms of downloads. It's a fantastic episode. But thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it. And your pocket knife will arrive soon.
Listen, if it's not Swiss Army, I don't want it.
Oh, man, no, we're not messing no Swiss Army, man. We're keeping it real, man.
My father carries around a pocket knife everywhere he goes as well. So that would be, it would be special to have one. But I'll take it. I will take your gift, my brother, for sure. You never know when you need those things, especially now that we're not traveling. I don't got to worry about like accidentally bringing it to the airport.
Yeah, you'll get it confiscated immediately.
Exactly. I love it so much, brother. Well, thank you so much. If you're willing to hang out for just a little bit, man, we'd love to do a quick Q&A with you. Are you down for that?
I'm here, man. Let's do it, please.
Amazing. Y'all, thank you so much for tuning in to this podcast episode of Diner Talks with James. As always, if you're interested in hearing the Q&A with Antonio, make sure you hop onto my YouTube page, type in James T. Robo, and his episode will pop up. Thank you so much for being here, my friends, and thanks for listening. Y'all take care and have a wonderful evening. All right, Antonio. We got a question earlier here that kind of came up, and it wasn't what my father said about the bread pudding. There was something else. But Claire was talking, and her roommate was Nancy Wall's Carell. I'm assuming Steve. That's Steve Carell's wife. That's a Super Small World. But what is it about the U.S. one, the U.S. version of The Office, that you don't like as much as the British one?
I just love British humor, and what I really loved about the British version of it. Let's be clear: Steve Carell and all the performers on the American version are great. I like dark comedy, and the British version is dark. There's so much sarcasm. It's not played with how do I put it? It's not played with a zing to it. It's played straight. It's kind of like Airplane, if you will. I love that in the movie original version of the movie Airplane.
Great movie.
They hired all serious actors. These were before Airplane, Leslie Nielsen, all these. I'm dating myself right now. These were all serious actors who played in serious movies. And when they were, doing the read-throughs and all that, they said, well, how do you want me to play this? These funny comedy lines. The director told them, play this as if you were in a serious movie. Don't play it like it's a comedy. Mm-hmm. So what I like about the British version that is played, that I know that the American version is a comedy, even though it's not the standard 3-camera show, etc. I just can't get through a full episode. And I think it's because I saw the British version first. It's the same reason I'm gonna get someone else mad. I don't like covers of songs because all I hear is the original version. So I think that has a lot to do with it. But Nancy Walls Carell, don't know her, no offense to her. And she's probably good driving around that Aston Martin, though. So she's not she's not worried about me. By the way, James, I didn't say this. Your car knowledge, I had no idea. And you named some things I didn't even know existed earlier, man. That's another conversation. But I'm over here like Ford F-150, and you like Bugatti Lambo Lanny. Like, I'm like, what is that?
That's it, man. Yeah, it's something that I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to. It's one of those things I don't know how to talk about, right? Like it's not like I have some crazy, amazing car, and I don't know. I'm not going to post other people's cars. But yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair.
Impressive.
It's something I've always enjoyed. I've always had car magazines around, and yeah.
I have to ask. Can you like fix cars? Are you good at that stuff too?
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay. Couldn't. Yeah. Nope. That's probably another reason why I don't get too into it, because I can't be like, once they open the hood, I'm like, yep, that's an engine. It's like part of me that's like shame in it, right? It's like, it kind of speaks to a lot of other things in my life where it's like, I know enough to have a really good conversation, but if I was around an expert, I would look like an idiot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've been thinking about hiring someone like for a day to teach me certain stuff. Like I would love to. I know we have another question, but I would love to pay someone for 8 hours to bring in like a 1985 car and teach me the basics of that engine, where the carburetor is, where all this stuff is. But that's another conversation.
Yep, exactly. Scott, apparently, Scott is right here with us.
Scott looks like he's a Minnesota fan. Okay.
Oh, he's big. He's from out here. And also, shout out to the Ren and Stimpy reference as well.
Nice.
I love it. Appreciate you, Scott. So, Antonio, here's a question that I had for you. And that is, you got to do a lot of interviews of individuals. What interview sticks out to you the most, as in like, oh, this was the one that made me think differently? Like halfway through the interview, you almost like stopped being a good interviewer because your mind was also kind of getting blown. Did you ever have an interview like that?
Yeah, well, I'll set this up by saying, with all the interviews I've done over the years, which, man, could it be thousands possibly? It's been every person from every walk of life, notable names that you're familiar with and people you never heard of in your life. But I always had interesting moments I'd always prepare like crazy for interviews, no matter who I was interviewing. But I always knew something special was happening, James, because I always had my note cards, with my questions and things I had to hit. I always knew something special was happening in the interview when I could put my note cards down.
Yeah.
And I would still hit everything that needed to be hit. I mean, there's sometimes I just had to, and you couldn't see them on TV, but whatever. 2 interviews that really stand out. One, back in 2008 or 2009, there was a huge rash of gun violence in Chicago, which unfortunately we're still seeing a lot of many years later. And I remember going in and doing a documentary for BET that I produced. And it was heavy, man. Talking a lot of folks, specifically young kids who have been the victims of gun violence. Yeah. And I had an interview with a mother who just a couple of days prior had lost her son to gun violence. And I felt guilty in so many different ways, just being all up in her face and having this interview and having these conversations. But I was blown away just by her strength, by her love for her child, knowing that she wanted to make a difference and ensure this didn't happen to anyone else. That's one that always stuck with me. That, as a journalist, sometimes I definitely did my darndest not to find myself even in emotional situations. I didn't want to cry. I just wanted to be there in the moment and do my job as a journalist. But sometimes you got to, whether you're a journalist or not, you're also a human, and those tears were going to come. So that was a moment
that you not to cry.
I've never been told not to cry. I'm trying to think, and when I was in grad school. If they're like, hey, section 103.9 of the journalist handbook, do not. They never tell you not to cry, but I'll tell you, I'm sure many of my executive producers over the years wouldn't encourage it, because if I cry, the viewer is going to say, oh, there's some bias coming in. This person isn't being, but I didn't care about that one. A second one, briefly, a couple years, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, had the opportunity to interview former Secretary of State John Kerry.
Wow.
On a stage in front of 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, I'd read his book and knew so much about the man and his work over the course of his career, et cetera. And that was a moment while I was interviewing him, and it was surreal. Like, regardless of your politics, if you're left or right, whether you like John Kerry or not, I just felt really honored, and it was amazing. It was this moment when I was like, I'm a kid from Jackson, Michigan, who thought that he'd get a job at a factory. And I mean, my father's worked in factories his whole life, blue collar guy, and I love that work. And who knew all these years later that I'd be on the stage in front of 5,000 people interviewing, the former Secretary of State about his life and about his career. And it's like I had to zap myself back into the moment, like a moment when I was just like kind of like, oh, what's happening? And then, that probably that quick moment, then you flip the switch and you're back in the moment and you're present. But that was just a moment of kind of how far, I don't know how far, just how fascinating this life is. Like, you never know where you're going to end up.
Yeah. Man, that's real. That's beautiful. What a powerful moment. And you're right. The juxtaposition of where you started to where you were that day is incredible, man. Thanks for sharing both of those stories. I mean, that I can only imagine how hard it would have been to hold back the tears had you tried to make that choice. That's powerful, man. Thank you for sharing both of those stories with us.
Yeah,
we'll end on one final question. And I think it's the one we've all been wanting to know pretty much the whole interview, Antonio. And that is, how can you leave a job selling the best food on the planet?
Oh my goodness. It was a good job. It was such a good job. I was responsible for 25 Winn-Dixie grocery stores in South Florida. R.I.P. Winn-Dixie.
R.I.P.
And it was
Piggly Wiggly would have outlasted Winn-Dixie.
I know, man. it was a good job. It just wasn't my job. But yeah, I was a beast at selling cheese, man. I was pretty good at it. Cheese game was on point.
Cheese game is on point. Should we jump into our cheese puns now? I know we talked about wanting to do a cheese pun segment.
Oh, I forgot about that.
All right, y'all. We'll be back. Anyway,
that's funny.
Antonio, thank you, man. Thank you so much for coming through. I really appreciate it. Thank you for dropping all of the nuggets.
Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate all you do and how you show up in this life. I'm honored to call you a friend.
Yes, my guy, for sure. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna chuck you back into the green room for a second. I'm gonna come to you in 1 second, man. My friends, thank you so much for hanging out with me on this episode of Diner Talks with James. It was so fun having you in the diner with me. I still long for the days where we can potentially find a producer who wants to pick this up and we actually film this live in a diner, mainly because I need more milkshakes in my life, but also because I think it'd be pretty special. This episode with Antonio was just that, special. Thank you so much for doing it. As always, if you want to learn more about him, make sure you check out the notes below and the YouTube page as well, or in the podcast notes as well. Thank you so much for being here, my friends. And as always, keep punching small talk in the face by asking better questions. You all take care and be well.